And it was a good kick in the butt for me. And I was like, you know what? You're right. I should be all in. Once I was all in, for lack of a better word, I just, I just really ended up loving it.
Welcome to Powerhouse, where we interview the biggest names in housing and ask them about their strategy for growth. I'm Diego Sanchez, president of HousingWire. My guest today is Justin Bailey, CEO of Realty Executives Associates. Justin, it's so great to have you on the show.
Hi, Diego. Thanks. I'm glad to be here. Thank you for asking me to participate.
Yeah, this should be a really good conversation. For those in my audience that are less aware, could you tell us more about Realty Executives Associates?
Absolutely. Realty Executives Associates, it was founded in 1977 in our market by a guy named Vance Berkey. He actually was on an airplane and saw an advertisement in a magazine for Realty Executives. They're based out of Phoenix. And so decided to, he had an independent firm at the time. There were 4 people in his office. And one of those was actually his wife. So he passed last November, which is really sad. He's a great man. But the way he tells the story is he set his agents down and said, I'm going to take this independent. I'm going to, make it Realty Executives. And he said, and all 4 of them left the room, including my wife. So he started with one person. And it's kind of a neat story, though. Three years later, so 1980, Realty Executives in our market, we're in East Tennessee, became number 1 in agent count, transaction size, and volume in just 3 short years. So I've been in this role for 5 years as the CEO, and so my job is just to not screw that up. It's a long run of being number 1. So,
did you acquire the business directly from the founder, or have there been other leaders in between them and you?
There have been other leaders. There's three owners at Realty Executives, and my predecessor was a guy named Steve Fogarty, who Vance sold it to them in, I want to say, maybe 2005, I think. And then in 2020, July of 2020, I took over a guy named Steve Fogarty. I took his spot.
So before you became a realtor, you spent several years in the nonprofit sector. Mm-hmm. Did that sector give you any strategies for success in real estate?
Yeah, that's a great question. I probably don't think about it as often as I should, but I do think that it did help. I worked for my educational background, I actually went to school to be a therapist, and often say I ended up a CEO who needs a lot of therapy.
And you probably provide a lot of therapy to your to your team as well, right?
Probably so. Yeah, I have heard them say so before. So I worked for a nonprofit called Young Life for 5 years, mainly working with adolescent teenagers. And so there are some core values, kind of core principles, I suppose. Like one of the main ones through Young Life is that you have to earn the right to be heard, and you do that through getting to know somebody, being relational, and showing up in their lives. And so I think that is a big one that I've not only in real estate, but even in my role now, I feel it's important to get to know someone. Just because you're the leader doesn't mean that they automatically will trust you or follow you. And so I think my avenue for doing that, which I learned through my work in the nonprofit world, was spend a lot more time going to funerals and weddings and hospitals when babies are born, and than I do, speaking at conferences or anything like that. And so I feel like earning that right is kind of part of my job. And then, another one, I think something I learned through my time there was that I think kids are automatically drawn to the oldest person in the room that will take them seriously. And I think adults are not all that different. I think it might be a different word. Maybe it's we're drawn to the most important person in the room that will pay attention to us. And so I feel like, not that I'm trying to say I'm important, I suppose maybe it might be perceived that way with the role I have, but I've thought about that a lot, of just trying to show up and pay attention to people and ask them how their marriages are and how their lives are, if they're hanging out with their kids enough, if they're spending personal time, if they're working on their hobbies, So yeah, I think those are some things that I probably picked up in my time there.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you learned about empathy and listening, like authentic listening.
Yeah, I think that's probably right.
Which is great. I love that answer. So you're a fourth generation realtor, which is wild. Is it just in the blood for you?
Oh man, I actually got into it kicking and screaming. My great grandfather, my great grandmother, my grandfather, and both of my parents were and are all realtors. My parents are still in real estate. And so my brother and sister tried it. I kind of went more I went to school to be a therapist. And I think some of that was because real estate had made my family crazy. But when I was working in the nonprofit space, we kind of saw the crash coming. And so one of the first things people stop doing when a market turns is financially donating to the nonprofit sector, unfortunately. One of the things, not always, but it's often the case. So we actually had quite a few layoffs of I was bottom of the totem pole. And so all of us were kind of told, hey, this is probably coming. You might want to find something else to do. And so I'd just gotten married. And the only other thing I knew how to do was real estate. And so my wife and I talked about it, and I said, well, I'm going to just get my real estate license. My intention was to open a counseling practice. But that requires money, which I did not have much of. And so I said, well, I don't get my real estate license. It'll give me some time. Man, I actually ended up really liking it. Probably about 2 years in, my dad came to me and said, I work on a team with my mom and my dad. My dad came to me and said, I know this was kind of going to be a temporary thing for you. And he really called me out. He said, but I think everyone can feel that. I'm afraid your clients can feel that. So you're doing a disservice to yourself and to them. So you either need to be all in or you need to go do something else. And it was a good kick in the butt for me. And I was like, you know what? You're right. Like, I didn't say that immediately. At first, disagreed. But
it was your dad, so you have to
that's
give a little bit of time.
But after a little bit of thought and time, I thought I should be all in. And once I was all in, for lack of a better word, I just really ended up loving it. In different aspects, I found out that I liked the broker role really well. So kind of evolved into doing that for a while. Yeah.
So tell us about that journey from, so you just told us the journey from sort of in and out, not fully in it. Your dad gave you the kick in the butt and then you were fully in it. Tell us about that journey from being fully in it to, as a realtor, to becoming the CEO of a pretty large brokerage.
Yeah. So let's see. I got my license in 2008. Was a realtor with Realty executives and then we'll say 2010 was when I got the kick in the pants to really buckle down. And then was with Realty executives. We were in a smaller office of theirs out in kind of a rural area. And 2016, when I kind of found my stride, I had at that point was a team leader, just got my managing broker's license, and kind of had found, I had a mentor of mine. I said, I'm really in this dilemma where I love working with clients, but I feel like I'm a little more drawn to like helping agents, answering those questions. I like teaching. And he asked me, he said, well, which phone calls do you like the most? And immediately I was like, when an agent calls me and they have a problem. That's my favorite phone call. He was like, well, I'd try to work a job out where you actually enjoyed the phone calls that you got. And so that would have been 2016. So Steve Fogarty, who was my predecessor, I didn't want to just leave, but I had decided I wanted to open up my own independent firm. My great grandmother had an independent. My grandfather did. My parents did for a while before they came to Realty Executives. And I think part of it was probably just wanting to prove to myself I could, or see if I had what it took to do it. So I took Steve to lunch. Again, I didn't want to just make a phone call and said, hey, and this is, keep in mind, this guy's like a mentor of mine for several years now. He's a legend in the industry, in our market especially. So I said, Steve, I've decided I'm going to leave REA and go open my own independent firm. And I was bracing for impact. And man, he was so excited for me. Like, he immediately was like, what are you going to call it? And I was like, Bailey and Company, and he started asking me all these questions about where's your office going to be and what color is your logo going to be. And it's almost like I forgot he was supposed to be mad at me. I left feeling empowered, and he said, I know you're going to do a great job. If I can ever help you, let me know. And so opened up an independent. I did that for 5 years. We had about 50 agents in 2 locations. And so this would have been 2020. So Steve, and we had kept in contact. He had stayed true to his word. He was who I would call if I had a question. He asked me to go to lunch, same restaurant, and he had reserved the same table, which was pretty cool. And he said, I want to slow down. I want to be a grandfather, and want to know if you would consider coming back to Realty Executives and take my job. And it was just the last thing I thought was coming. So, I actually told him no. And then I forgot to ask my wife about it. And so I got home and I told her about it. And she's like, what'd you say? I was like, well, I said no. And she's like, did you want to call me, or maybe we should have talked about that? I say that in jest, but it was more the reason I said no is because the firm was called Bailey and Company, and I started it when my daughter was born, and it had just kind of, when your name's attached to it, it's just, I think it's even more just a fabric of your life. But after, Kristen and I talked, and again, I talked to my parents and a couple of mentors of mine, and, everyone kept saying to me, you've always talked about how you wanted to have an impact on the industry, and where you told people and taught people a different way to do real estate. And it just seems like this would give you a bigger opportunity to do that. And so, so I ended up calling Steve back. I remember when we told our kids that so Realty Executives acquired Bailey and Company in order to kind of just to make the transition make sense. When we told our kids, my daughter said, because again, it was our last name, my daughter's first response was, does that mean we're going to have to change our last name? I was like, no, buddy, you're not going to be Olivia Realty Executives. But that kind of gives you some context, right? It was a pretty tough decision. But I'm really glad that I did. And I will say it was super scary, because I made the decision to do that in January of 2020. And my official start date, there was so much kind of legal paperwork and stuff we had to go through, was supposed to be July 1st. And as you know, COVID happened right in the middle of all that. And I was terrified. I was acquiring Steve's percentage in the company and taking on debt. And I was so nervous. Obviously it ended up, real estate exploded instead of dissolving, but I'd convinced myself this was the biggest mistake ever. Thankfully that's not how it worked out, but
yeah, it seems like it worked out really well. So you went from running a brokerage with about 50 agents to running one that I believe has over 1,000. I don't know if it did at the time, but it's significantly bigger, 15 to 20x in size in terms of agent count. What were the learning experiences in those first 6 months of such a dramatic increase in size in brokerages?
That's a great question. Yeah, we had, let's see, when I started July 1st of 2020, we had 582 agents. We have 1,091 today. But that jump from 50 to 500 was, I don't know, maybe there's a book I could have read if it's out there. I haven't found it yet. I learned a lot, and honestly, I learned a lot the hard way. When you have 50 agents, you can really know them. They were who came to my birthday parties, and I went to theirs, and I knew their kids' names, like all of their kids' names. I knew how their marriages were. I knew their parents and grandparents. It was like a family, and you can do that when there's 50. You can't do that when there's 500. And so, honestly, that first year, I about killed myself trying to do what I was doing here. It was hard on my marriage. I wasn't the dad I wanted to be. And really it's because I was just trying to do the impossible, which was to do what you can do for a small group to a really large group. And so some of that was realizing, keep in mind, I don't have a business background. I ended up going back to grad school after this because I was like, I need to learn something about business. But yeah, realizing like we didn't have a real organizational chart. We had a little over 50 full-time staff, and everyone just reported to me. And that was just kind of how Steve had done it. And probably his season of life that worked really well. But just implementing things like having directors and managers and, really creating just a small core team that immediately reported to me, who I could invest in and know well. But man, that took some time and asking a lot of smart people good questions. And that was probably the hardest part.
So it sounds like one of the things is you really created some infrastructure in the organization, a reporting structure. Are there things that you had to let go of in order to be a better leader?
Yeah. Kind of going with what I had talked about, one of the things that I had to let go of was that I consider myself pretty relational. And so this notion that you can be relational with that many people was one thing that I had to really let go of. And that was really hard for me. If I'm honest, I never feel like I'm far from the smartest person in the room. And so it felt like being relational with people was like the only bullet I had. And so taking that away, to be super transparent was like, I don't know that I'm good at much else. And so that was really difficult for me. In fact, like talking with, Steve stayed around. He kind of took a step back to being a broker of one of our offices. And so I remember like talking to him saying like, I don't know that you picked the right guy. I don't know if that answers exactly your question, but that was the biggest thing.
It definitely does. And I would imagine that you enjoyed the relational side and probably still keep some of it. And so how did you sort of move on from losing something that probably was pretty important to you in terms of trying to build those relationships with everyone on your team?
Well, I got really good, I have gotten much better, I should say, realizing that I can't make everybody happy. I'm going to let people down. I'm not going to be able to know everyone. But I can take kind of this core group, so like our brokers and our directors, which is about 9 people. I can invest in them and really kind of say like, here's how I would like for you to invest in others. And then that just breaks down right to managers and office staff and agents. And so I think instead of trying to duplicate myself, it was more, here's a way that you can be with people to where I think they feel like they have a sense of belonging. That's something we talk about a lot at Realty Executives. It's very important to me that our agents feel like they belong. I think that's why, out even past money, I think that's really why a lot of agents leave firms. But also I wanted them to do that organically as themselves. And so what that required was me getting to know them in a way to say, hey, I think this is how being relational, as we keep talking about, would make sense for you. And so it was really important to me, though, that I wasn't just trying to clone myself in the people that are around me.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. So you wrote a great article last year for HousingWire that had a line, trying to be someone you're not is exhausting. What do you mean by that line?
That was kind of an article I wrote that it really came from a class that I started teaching at Realty Executives, and I've taught it a couple other places, called Identity and Leadership. And it really is just me kind of pulling back the veil on my own leadership journey, which was, I would see these dynamic leaders in real estate, or I'd watch them do a training, or I'd see them at an event. And I think out of my own insecurity, what I realized I was trying to do is I was trying to be someone I'm not. I was trying to be, I don't know, maybe the word's cooler than I am, I suppose. But I remember I did a survey not long after I was here. I was here for about a year, probably. And so asking a series of questions to our agents, really trying to gauge, like, where are we dropping the ball? It was really important to me to try to figure out, like, what are some expectations that we're not hitting? Are those even valid expectations? And so anyway, there was a series of questions. One of those, when I started, I was the CEO, but I also was the broker of one of our offices. It was important to me to kind of have that aspect of what it looked like to be here. And so I think one of the questions was like, how is your experience with your managing broker? And one of the agents in that office, I don't know who it was because it was anonymous, but they said, Justin's not a real leader. He's a cheerleader. And I mean, I think we got like 300 responses from that survey, and they were all amazing, except this one, and I couldn't let it go. I mean,
you can't let it go.
Hole in me. It was the only thing I paid attention to. And at first, it really stung. I mean, it's a tough thing to hear. But I'm in count. Not only do I believe in counseling, I go myself, but I remember talking to my counselor at the time. His name was Kevin. And, his response was so great to that. He said, so you don't want to be a cheerleader? And I was like, no. I mean, that's like, who wants to be a cheerleader? And he was like, so you don't want to be someone who like sits on the sidelines and cheers for people when they win? And I was like, no, I do want to do that. And I think another one, he said, so you don't want to be somebody whose kind of main focus is to celebrate the success of others instead of themselves? And I was like, no, I do want to do that. And he just started describing a cheerleader. And then he, in his kind of perfect way, was like, well, it sounds to me like you're a cheerleader. And that was a pretty big moment for me. And there were several other ones. That was kind of part of the idea of realizing, like, okay, I think that was something Kevin said to me was, part of being a leader is not only acknowledging who you are, but some of that is acknowledging who you're not, right? And so we just spent some time over the next couple of months, really, golly, maybe a year. And that was the main focus of our conversation, was him kind of helping me be really honest about who I'm not. I've always been drawn to like the main guy in the movie, right? Like, I remember watching Ali with my family, and Muhammad Ali is out there, and he's like the man in the middle of the ring. And I was trying to pay attention to myself. I was like, there's something going on as I'm like watching this movie. And what I realized was like, I'm not a boxer. Like, I think it would be amazing to be that kind of guy in the ring, but I'm a really good corner man. That's like, when I'm at my best, I'm celebrating other people. And when I'm at my worst, I'm trying to get other people to celebrate me. And yeah, I could go on and on, but the majority of that article was just kind of about my leadership journey and trying to be honest about who I am and who I'm not.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that you could be a really great corner man. And earlier in the conversation, you talked about, well, the calls that I love to receive are where I can help agents solve problems. So, that's what a corner man does as well. It's not just
Right.
celebrating and cheerleading, but like, I got to solve some problems with this
Right.
boxer.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting.
Yeah,
So
that's a great observation. Thanks for saying that.
yeah. So there's a big debate in real estate right now about private listings, and you've got Compass and maybe a few other brokerages on one side, and Zillow plus several large brokerages on the other. Have you thought about this debate? Where do you fall in this debate between private listings and putting everything on the MLS?
You know, we don't have Compass in our market, and so it isn't one that I've been forced to need to pay attention to, just because I don't see it as something that really directly affects my agents as of today. And I've followed it from a distance, but I think there's a difference in sometimes national conversations aren't the same as neighborhood conversations, right? And in our neighborhood conversations, meaning just here in Knoxville and East Tennessee, it just hasn't been something that's really been all that important. When I've kind of asked agents about it, they're like, "Yeah, I've kind of seen that, but I don't really know much about it." I mean, philosophically, I'm a believer in clear cooperation. Um, I I think the MLS has a really tough job. I was the president of our local association last year, and so MLSs have really two customers, in my personal opinion. It's the members, but it's also consumers, right? Because part of their job is to protect consumers. Um, and so I've always just kind of been a believer in following the rules that are put out there. And I don't mind to challenge them if I feel like they're punitive to my agents, but I really haven't found CCP, in my personal opinion, to be punitive. The idea of seller choice, I think everyone should have choice, but at least in our MLS, they already do. We have what you can do. It's just called an open listing agreement. You can do an office exclusive listing agreement, which really gives them kind of the same thing. And so, yeah, I don't really particularly believe, I guess, in the notion that sellers don't have choice. Again, at least in our market. And that's a hard thing to do on a national level because I don't know what the rules are in Sheboygan. So maybe they are more punitive to sellers.
Yeah, super important to distinguish between the conversations that are happening on a national level and those that are happening in a region or in a city or even in a neighborhood, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
But another national question, and we'll probably wrap with this one, because you're pretty active in the National Association of Realtors. You have been over the course of your career, and that organization has had some pretty well documented struggles, particularly over the past few years. Do you think Nykia Wright, who's the new CEO there, do you think she's leading a comeback this year?
I really do. I really like Nykia. I can't say that I know her super well personally. I was on the board of directors for NAR for 2 years. I rolled off last year, so I'm not currently. But I did get to be there as she kind of stepped in at the helm. Now, when I say it was a director, keep in mind there's like 900 of them, so you're not really all that involved. But I have been very impressed with her. I saw her speak at an event. And I was impressed with the moderator kind of tried to corner her on something. And, she's so good at being like, respectfully, I'm going to reverse your question. And she just changed the whole narrative of the conversation. She seems to be both bold and humble. And those are two things I personally find very attractive in a leader. I appreciate that she's trying to change the organization in terms of cutting some of the fat that I think was probably there. And I think all organizations are going to go through this at some point, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like at some point, every organization is going to miss the ball and somebody's going to have to come in to see an outsider's perspective. And that's why I like that she was an outsider. I think it would have been a mistake to pick someone who just came in that didn't know another way. And I've liked that she's done it. I think her hiring Sherry Chris was genius.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how many of us there are in terms of, I think we're the 34th largest brokerage in the country, but I mean, there's a lot of people way bigger than we are. And she'll call my cell phone. I don't know how she got my cell phone. I didn't even know her before. She literally called me one day and was like, "Hey, this is Sherry Chris with NER." I didn't know who she was. Just checking in on you, seeing how you're doing. I think stuff like that just is going to go a long way.
Yeah, they're a pretty dynamic duo. I have also been very impressed. I saw Nykia at a 1,000 watt event, and then she was at our recent event, The Gathering, and her transparency and ability to light up the stage, like she literally got a standing ovation at the 1,000 watt event, and no other speaker did. It was really impressive. So that's pretty neat. So you mentioned being one of 900 board members. Is that a move that they could make that would maybe clean things up a little bit to shrink the size of that board a little bit?
I think so. Or I don't know, give them different names or something. It just, what was hard for me is I don't, I'm a believer in the need for NAR. I really am. I mean, going all the way back to why it even existed, right? That you'd have competitors that would come together and kind of put their swords down and agree to a set of practices that protect consumers. I mean, it's a noble endeavor. But I have a hard time being a part of organizations, like being on a board. Like, I hate being on a board where I don't actually have a job or make an impact or create value. I just would rather go hang out with my kids. And so that was what I found difficult as a board member, was I didn't really see a way to add value. And so I think if they could figure out how to cut the size down, I mean, there's probably a smarter way, and Nykia will probably figure that out, but some move like that I think would go a long way. Well,
Justin, I have really enjoyed this conversation. I hope you have too. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, Diego, I really enjoyed it. Thank you for having me.